And really quick, I'm just going to post in the chat the link to the presentation that you guys can feel free to access anytime afterwards. So that way you have it if ever you desire. And then we'll get started. So yeah, again, thank you guys for your patience, and let me. Okay, great. So everyone can see the screen with the social media strategies for the classroom. Well, first, I want to say hello and welcome to our presentation on using social media in the classroom. This presentation will be divided into 3 main sections, and we will begin with part 1, which will look at Syracuse University's existing social media policies, as well as FERPA considerations that you will need to be aware of when you are deciding the ifs and hows of including social media when you teach. So social media is defined as forms of electronic communication, such as websites for social networking and microblogging, through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content, such as videos. Popular examples of social media includes Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, TikTok, Tumblr, Weibo, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. Though this is of course not a complete list, and a more specified social media sites exist. Ravelry, for instance, is a popular social media site for knitters, crocheters, and crafters. Thus, there is a lot of potential to utilizing popular and specific social media sites and applications in your class, but it can appeal to how students are already communicating with others. But before doing so, you should be aware of Syracuse University's existing social media policy.
You can access SU's best practices policy through the SU website. The first thing you may notice is that this policy is geared toward officially associated social media accounts, such as at Syracuse U and at SU campus. SU has provided some questions you should ask yourself when considering using social media with your teaching. Some questions are great to consider even if the scope of your social media use is limited to just those in your class. For example, what are your unit's goals? What does success look like? How will social media help to reach those goals? How will social media be integrated into your existing strategies? How will you track and measure your efforts? And who's your target audience? What do you want them to do or to know? What are their interests, demographics, and relationship with your unit? And what is your content plan? What types of content will you share? Articles, photos, graphics, videos, etc. What information is most relevant to your audiences and the unit? Prioritize this content and eliminate superfluous information. Who will do the work? How will you monitor the accounts and engage your audiences? How often will you monitor the accounts? When and how often will you engage with followers? And who will do the work? A couple other questions. Which social media platforms are the best choices? Which platform do your audiences already use? Which ones will best showcase your content? And which platforms align with your unit's goals? And then, is your plan sustainable? Will your plan endure over the long term, and how? Will the plan be effective if the leader of this effort leaves the university? And when and how often will you update the plan? So knowing your answers to these questions can be really helpful. Do you want to encourage students to keep a public blog during the duration of your course? Or maybe you want to offer students a chance to be creative with a project or homework assignment and to create a TikTok video to prompt you to a prompt you provide to them in class. Looking at your syllabus and lesson plans and considering these questions can be helpful.
Okay. Well, if you haven't run away yet, I'm going to assume you're still interested in using social media in the classroom. Another consideration for using social media is to know and to plan to inform your students about your social media's privacy policies, as well as security measures. By its nature, social media involves sharing information to a broader audience. Some social media can allow you or your students to limit who can see or access your posts, but it is best to consider all material shared on these platforms as having been made publicly available. Once a post has been made, the content is held by a third party, and more or less, the user relinquishes full ownership of any post or material in exchange for free storage. Thus, it is important that you and your students familiarize yourselves with the platform-specific privacy policies, settings, and remain to keep those up to date. Some students and instructors may not want to link any or all social media accounts to their academic career. Thus, it may be best to create new accounts. Using Twitter as an example, an instructor could create and share access to a shared class account using a username associated with the course itself. For example, @SU_, and you could insert the name of your class or the designation like DES 113 for Design 113. With this example, students would have access to the same account wherein they post content relevant to the course. With Facebook, though, you could create a group or page specific to your class with settings, private or secret, that restrict who has access to the group.
So privacy extends beyond social media settings and includes the content posted to them. Posts should not include any personal data about students without explicit prior approval from the student and, if applicable, their guardian. This can include images, recordings, or any documentation related to the student's performance in class. So for example, your class is performance-based and you have asked students to record themselves. I, for example, teach at Center School of Music, so my class is definitely for performance-based. You should not post their performances to social media yourself without their expressed approval, but students could elect to post themselves. As a final consideration, you'll want to ensure that your social media use in the classroom does not violate any of your students' rights under FERPA. FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, which is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. The law applies to all schools that receive funds under an applicable program of the U.S. Department of Education. Unfortunately, FERPA does not offer clear answers regarding social media and student privacy. From their documentation, they ask, is student information used in online educational services protected by FERPA? Their answer, it depends. Because of the diversity and variety of online educational services, there is no universal answer to this question. FERPA protects personally identifiable information from students' education records from unauthorized disclosure. We have included links to multiple sources, including relevant items on the government's FERPA website. Like the SU policies, social media in the classroom is in a gray area that requires consideration, planning, transparency, and your best common sense. While this may seem daunting, we have some suggestions for how to include social media in your class that would be fun and engaging for you and your students.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. So now we're entering into what we call part 2, which is using social media in the classroom. The University of Washington completed a study in 2015 about social media in the college classroom. There's some key takeaways from the study that demonstrate the powerful position social media can have as a teaching tool. UW saw an increase in social media usage and student interest in using social media, which rose from 10% in 2010 to 21% in 2015. This is important because using social media to enrich your classes only works if students are interested in social media as a teaching tool. Given that social media use has only increased since 2015, it seems safe to guess that students are even more interested in social media in 2020. Students in the study believe social media help them remain connected to their peers and their institutions. Interestingly, though, students also shared concerns with their instructors that social media could pose a distraction from the course. The study found that social media had a, quote, dual effect on student learning, promoting productive and unproductive behaviors. The benefits of using social media in the classroom is that students bettered task-oriented and relationship-building behaviors. The downside is that it can also distract students from the task at hand, such as specific assignments. We've all been there doing something, and then you want to check something on your phone, and then suddenly it's 20 minutes later, and you're like, where has the time gone? As mentioned, both students and instructors were concerned about social media as a distraction at the time of that study. So let's discuss some useful strategies and ways to utilize social media in your classroom. While not every element will work for you, our goal is to offer some general guides and examples that you may be able to take and adjust to suit your needs.
In the Journal of Instructional Pedagogies, Leigh Browning, R. Nicholas Gerlich, and Laurie Westerman explain that social media provides an opportunity for educators to speak to students in a way they're likely to be reached, particularly as we will be shifting to online instruction after Thanksgiving, or maybe you've already shifted part of your course to online. Using social media can be a great tool to keep students active, engaged, and comfortable. As mentioned in part 1, a critical aspect will be to first review the privacy policy and any security settings, and to communicate these aspects with your students early if you do decide to use social media. You'll want to set clear expectations on how social media will be used and what will be expected from your students. A great way to do this would be to have it be its own clear section in your syllabus, if you create your own, or to augment the syllabus with one specific to your section if you use the syllabus provided by a lead instructor, maybe an extra page you attach to the end, or one you pass out in class. Within this, you'll want to give an option to opt out if students are uninterested, uncomfortable, or otherwise disinclined on using one or all the forms of social media, with plenty of time to contact you about opting out. Ideally, by establishing firmly why you are using social media, what will be achieved in the course, how you will be using it, and any privacy, user settings, and accessibility concerns. Early on, you and your students will be interested and engaged in your project. For example, if your course has a large project that students are working on throughout the course, theoretically working on throughout the course and not at the end, and it culminates in a final presentation or is about a topical event, it could be fun to encourage students to share progress over Twitter or TikTok or set points during the semester. This could give them some creativity within reaching project benchmarks, while also getting their academic work out there to be seen by peers and experts in their field. It will also hold them accountable to reaching these project benchmarks, so you will know which students are making projects and which are falling behind and might need outreach from you. Another way you could use social media is to get your students to think about their social media and internet privacy. You could poll your class about who uses a common social media platform like Facebook or Twitter, and then give a small test from the terms and conditions that no one reads, which I have also been guilty of. From this, you could encourage your students to review their privacy settings, not just once, but frequently, and to adjust their permissions accordingly. By using this approach, you'd be reinforcing that students should know how their content is shared and who has access to it.
Of course, we must be cognizant and responsible to students' preferences and their means of access. Not every student is guaranteed to have access to a home computer or a smartphone that gives access to social media applications. And so you will want to ensure that your students have alternatives and resources to achieve any social media use. Many of the biggest social media applications will also have web-based applications that you can use. For example, Instagram is mostly geared towards smartphone use, but it does have a web-based application that can view and post to the platform. As mentioned, you will want to do all you can to ensure the protection of you and your students' information. Following FERPA and SU guidelines, it is obviously, following FERPA and SU guidelines is obviously key, but you will also want to use general common sense and empathy. Although you are a student yourself, you are also in a position of teaching authority. Thus, there are inherent power dynamics in being a TA that you will want to be aware of. As such, do not reveal personal data about students, including sharing images or recordings that could identify students, unless you have their express prior approval, as stated before. Students should be the only ones to initiate any friend request, follows, or contact over social media. Personally speaking, I have adopted the approach that should a student send a request, I will accept it after graduation, mine or the students', but that's just my approach. Just know that should a student initiate contact over social media, you should be aware that it is taking place outside the officially recognized conversation system of our SYR email, but it is still a correspondence between you and a student that has the same power dynamics of the TA to student conversation, and that you are operating in an official capacity. So ultimately, this is your job, and you are working for the university, even if you're communicating over Facebook Messenger. So next, let's explore some of the more direct examples of ways to use social media in the classroom. Up to this point, most of our examples have been more theoretical. While we can't account for every class or major, hopefully we have presented and we will present enough different possibilities that you will feel inspired to find a route that suits your specific needs. But how to get started? One way to begin integrating social media in the classroom is to ask other instructors, TAs, or students what they are doing, what is working, and what isn't. If you like Facebook, but none of your students have touched the application in years, it may not be the most effective tool as you may have hoped. In addition to these sources for effective strategies and assessments, here are some ideas for ways you can use social media as a teaching and learning tool. You can use Twitter to hold real-time course discussions that include remote learners. You can also encourage students to create course-specific virtual study groups over social media. You can have them complete a collaborative assignment over social media, or connect with other students or campus organizations over Facebook to learn about co-curricular activities related to your course. This can be especially useful considering the robust amount of virtual offerings Syracuse has as far as like speakers, presentations, and encouraging them to find out through social media and get involved with ones that may really apply to your course. You can also facilitate a class discussion over social media in place of, for us, Blackboard's discussion board, posting questions on a course-specific social media account and inviting students to respond to the prompt and add to the conversation. Personally speaking, I know of fellow cohort who has most of their class take place over, their class discussions take place over Facebook about Egyptian art history. So it's really fascinating and is definitely being utilized. You can also create an assignment that requires students to connect with social media content to complete it. And you can also hold your office hours over social media, which is especially good considering our ongoing pandemic. You can also disseminate research findings and course information through a popular social media platform.
Ultimately, using social media in the classroom should be about your interest and comfort level. If you are uninterested in the idea, there's no need to force yourself to include a social media section in your course, but it is useful for engaging students in the courses that many TAs teach, which are generally required introductory courses that may not be anyone's first choice to register for. Additionally, presenting social media in your classes can be an excellent way to prepare students to transition from school to their professional careers. For example, SU is well known for our journalism department. Increasingly, reporters build a strong body of immediate reporting by posting and retweeting information to Twitter. be it their on-the-ground observations or links to their professional publications. For a Newhouse introductory course, it could be great to encourage or require students to craft a professional Twitter account for reporting based on researching successful usage by journalists in the field. For a more local approach, many student journalists from the Daily Orange, our independent paper, have established their own presences online, such as Emma Foltz and Chris Hippensteel. For those degrees that have a more academic career bent, we can look at recent example from the graduate art history program. Ensuring accuracy online, students update Indigenous artists' Wikipedia entries. This write-up in the SU newsletter details a way that a course used Wikipedia, not exactly social media, but certainly a socially sourced knowledge platform, to expand public knowledge of Indigenous artists. By having students publish their changes or additions to Wikipedia, it promotes multiple elements at once. It gives students a professional means to publish their work and build their professional portfolio. It, as mentioned, expands public knowledge, but it also gives students a look at the inner workings of Wikipedia and why it is not deemed a trustworthy source for academic work. One student from this project reported seeing her changes later revert to previous misinformation shortly after her changes were published. The crowdsurfing of misinformation can thus be a useful starting point, but not reputable for making claims in a paper, project, or presentation. While these examples may not translate exactly to your course, our hope is that they present you with inspiration for strategically utilizing social media in your course. And if all else fails, encouraging students to keep a blog relating to your course can always be a good supplemental source for academic engagement.
Indeed. In an article by Vicki Coleman of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, she advocated for social media as a primary source in academic work, citing that, quote, that social media platforms such as Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook do contain firsthand accounts of history and are tremendously informative in terms of modern day culture and trends. So Twitter reports that it has more than 140 million active users with over 340 million tweets per day. This means that 1 billion tweets are sent every 3 days. So that's a lot of information that can be utilized. So we hope this part of our presentation has been helpful. And again, links should be included in the presentation that has been shared with more information. So now we move on to part 3, the issues around social media and students.
So welcome to the final part of our social media presentation. In the first part, we explored existing policies and expectations, as well as professional considerations to use when teaching with social media in your classes. The second part explored how to use social media in the classroom. This final section will explore potential issues around using social media in your classroom and strategies to rise above those challenges. SU is working to address some of the biases that culminated in a painful series of racist incidents during the fall of last year. And as such, a critical part of your job will be ensuring the comfort and well-being of your students. A frequent criticism of social media is its ability to be weaponized to promote racist, sexist, ableist, and/or homophobic views, and to promote abuse. Trolling, the act of writing or posting content specifically to rile up, upset, mock, or insult someone, and doxing, the action of finding or publishing private information about someone on the internet without their permission, especially in a way that reveals their name, address, etc., can be painful, can be utilized to painful ends online. It is important to make a distinction between trolling and the discomfort that can come from genuine exchange and debate of ideas, morals, and principles that can occur in our diversified, inclusive classrooms. Trolling is about silencing others through mockery, hate speech, intimidation, or harassment. You and your students should be aware that in engaging with the public via social media, there's a risk of exposing yourself to these harmful online practices from others. Trollbusters is a resource designed specifically for journalists, but many of their tools and recommendations are useful for counteracting any cyberbullying. This infographic that you see on the screen, it details what the theoretical type of abuse is and the recommendations on steps to take to protect yourself. Trollbusters also has digital hygiene courses geared towards preventing online abuse before it happens. They are short, they're free, and they're informative. The best combination.
If online abuse turns toward you or your students, and it is being perpetrated by one of your students, a call coming from inside the house, as they say, having a specific portion of your syllabus be a code of conduct can give you legitimacy in drawing boundaries in your classroom on acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. By having, for example, everyone read through and initial that they have read and agreed to a code of conduct early in the class, you have their buy-in on interacting respectfully and appropriately with you and other students. For the entirety of SU's mission statement and code of conduct and ethics, please review the link provided in this presentation at your leisure. Another important aspect of social media is that is increasingly necessary in our fast communication world is media literacy. Media literacy is defined as, quote, a 21st century approach to education. It provides a framework to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate with messages in a variety of forms, from print to video to the internet. Media literacy builds an understanding of the role of media in society, as well as essential skills of inquiry and self-expression necessary for citizens of a democracy. The ubiquitous nature of social media, as of this recording, the current president of the United States has often delivered policy decisions via tweet. And the speed at which it moves means it is essential for your students to develop the ability to fact check and look for legitimate sources for news and information. Somewhat recently, the protests against police brutality and extrajudicial killings in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, posts were circulated that drew attention to the strategic placement of bricks in these protest zones. But the truth is, those bricks were not placed there to induce property destruction, as BuzzFeed reporters detailed in their article. Fact-checking this takes time, which is antithetical to how social media operates. A study by George Pearson, a senior lecturer at The Ohio State University, found that, quote, people viewing a blend of news and entertainment on a social media site tended to pay less attention to the source of content they consumed, meaning they could easily mistake satire or fiction for real news. Storyful, an independent service that investigates and traces information, particularly information shared over social media, has several case studies where they tracked the misinformation and disinformation around different topics and traced the real-world effects of that flawed information. For example, in this screenshot, they have traced how unfounded rumors about 5G health concerns resulted in the blocking of a 5G tower deployment in Milli Valley, California, by their city council. The cited health concerns were based on those unfounded claims, meant that the measure to not go forward on building that tower was passed by a measure of 29-1. In one way or another, social media touches our lives, either from direct usage to news dissemination to policies enacted at multiple levels of governance here in the US. There are a wide application of considerations before utilizing social media in your classroom, but there is just as many, if not more, benefits to creating assignments and policies around its usage in your classroom. Social media can keep your students engaged, provide creative opportunities for them, and help them develop essential skills in media literacy and protecting their digital privacy. Hannah and I hope that this presentation and the cited resources are helpful, and I'm sure you will take the best approach for you and your students. So good luck, and best of luck teaching here at SU. So that concludes our presentation. Does anyone have any questions for us?
You can either put in the chat or just unmute yourself. Very casual.
Or if anyone has any experiences using social media that they'd like to share.
Yeah.
I can share. My one of the classes I teach is keyboard skills. It's for music majors that are non-pianists, and for those classes, there's about 3 sections of them. And so we use social media, specifically Facebook, to upload the notes from that day, the assignments, since they're the same for all 3 courses, and it kind of keeps it in one page for all of them. We do have some students that are taking the class remotely, so that also helps. And it's really easy to just upload it right onto an app that you already have on your phone. Sometimes for Blackboard, it takes a second because you have to go onto your laptop, or you have to log in from somewhere that you can upload everything. So it's a quick way to get it to the students.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Natalie, and I am a second-year grad student in the Communication and Rhetorical Studies program. I just kind of want to share a little bit of my experience using social media in the classroom. Majority of our TA work are for courses where students learn about speeches and how to advocate for themselves. And social media definitely comes in use. I can say that my biggest challenge, I think, this semester has been like the virtual aspect of learning, in that you can't really keep track of, the students, like, and how they're using, social media, because whatever platform they open up, they can kind of look at things for themselves. So I can't say that has been a challenge, but it is an engaging way. And like when I ask my students, what parts of the class they like, that is one of the things they really enjoy. And so I did want to share that I do think social media is a really big way to help.
Yeah, Natalie, thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that definitely builds on, it kind of is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Where it helps those kind of productive behaviors and also the unproductive behaviors, but it's also can be so engaging and really kind of helps build that kind of digital footprint and expertise. So yeah, thank you so much.
We also have a comment in the chat. I teach Spanish and use Instagram for some activities. The students seem to like that. Also is easy to use because they know how it works. I asked them to open an account just for my class. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Do other folks have experiences or questions about how they might use this?
Yeah. Does anyone think they might use it in like their next class if they're not using one already?
I can think one of the issues that I think a lot of TAs and instructors are having this semester is, at least with online courses in particular, keeping people communicating, motivated, engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess depending on what platform is the platform du jour, that seems to be, I can certainly think that, Blackboard is not the place where students are going to hang out and discuss ideas, but maybe, maybe creating a Facebook page or doing something else with social media is sort of, the idea is always sort of to keep our techniques relevant, and meet them where they're actually at. So that might be a good way of sort of using this technology to bolster what's going on in this particular context.
Definitely. And to build on that, I think it also If you're teaching classes that are primarily online, it's a great way for students to actually meet the other students rather than, let's say, if your class, you mainly hold it through Zoom or something else, you may only see just their name. So it's a great way for you to actually get to know your students and for other students to get to know the students in their class. And to at least somewhat keep the idea of like camaraderie, being in a classroom, knowing that other people are taking the same course of you. Social media is really good for that.
Is anyone just totally resistant to the idea of using social media? I mean, I guess you might question why you're in this session, but I mean, if you haven't used social media as a tool in your class, I guess we might ask why not, and do you see any sort of pitfalls in your own use of it?
And it definitely may not work for every single course. Definitely, we're not telling you have to use it, but I think there are a lot of benefits to it. And like in the presentation, it's something just to consider. Maybe go through those checkpoints that are in those questions to ask yourself. And if you find there are more benefits than there are, or there are more pros than cons, might be something to try out.
Yeah.
Definitely don't have to though.
Yeah, and definitely I think starting small, if you're not sure, is a great way. Like it could even, if you didn't want to have them directly, your students directly engage with using social media, but you wanted them to be kind of be aware of what's out there, is like maybe having them research, like, you know, if you know of certain scholars or really big like people in your field or like relevant to the course, having them kind of research their, you know, if they have a Twitter, like what are they posting on Twitter? Is that different from what they might have on their Facebook page? Do they have a YouTube channel? Is that different? Like what's, you know, kind of how they're curating things could be a nice way to get them thinking about their social media presence, who else is out there. It's a really nice way to kind of connect to, you know, contemporary thinkers, as well as like, you know, most of your students will probably have some sort of social media. And so they'll be aware, and they might, if they're sitting and you're not sure if they're listening to your Zoom call or if they're at the back of an auditorium with a mask on, you might see them kind of perk up if you mention like signing something on Instagram or Twitter. So definitely don't have to reconfigure your entire course to use social media, but it might be something worth like exploring and seeing.
I could also see that this might be a way of, I mean, so many of us are trying to think of different ways for students to engage in assessments, you know, instead of just doing a paper or an exam. Is there some other kind of project or something like that that they could do that you know, sort of fits their needs and their style a little bit more, and having the options of all these other platforms and tools besides simply Blackboard and what we have integrated into it, might be a great way to sort of open that up a little bit more. You know, if you're not if you're not great at writing a paper, then, you know, maybe do something on one of these platforms that performs the content or something like that. And I can see that working in a lot of different disciplines, not just, you know, not just performative ones, but you know, if you, especially if your students are not majors in your particular class, you know, it might be a nice way to sort of get them more involved, again, sort of where they live. And we also have another comment. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, I was about to say this
Okay,
exact same thing.
you can go.
Oh, sure. Well, Melvina kindly shared her experience where it said, in our class, one of the assignments for students is finding science phenomena on social media and explain why it is good or bad representation. Since many teachers use Pinterest for lesson plans, some students found really good science phenomena on Twitter, though. So yeah, it's like seeing what's out there. And again, I think, I think of all those like fascinating YouTube channels, and I think Instagrams where they're like quick hacks of things, and it's like, that's impossible. Like you can't actually like take a coal, dip it in peanut butter, and then dip it in like ice water and get like a crystal out of it. Like that's not possible. But there are some like really fascinating and like really clever, like actual genuine hacks or like science examples that like teachers have come up with to get their students engaged that they filmed. And yeah, so I think that's really great, and I think could really that approach could really apply across disciplines, not just to the science fields. Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's really great. And that kind of builds on like what Hannah and I were saying, that like, so a lot of times like just asking one another and seeing like what has worked and what hasn't can really help you to like think of things that, never would occur to you on your own. Like I never would have thought to kind of look at what was good or bad representation of science, but I mean, that kind of gets my head turning about like, how could I use that in my fields and like the classes I'm teaching? So I think that's really great.
I just have to bow out now because I have to go get my son. So thank you all for coming. Even though I'm leaving, please continue the discussion. Thank you so much, all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. One other thing I wanted to mention is that maybe you don't include social media in your classroom, but if you are teaching students that plan to have a career in the field that you are teaching, maybe talking about social media etiquette, or I like the word that Kelly used, which is curating a social media presence. We are in a world that uses like technology a lot. Social media, it's kind of hard to stay away from it. So at some point, your students may have to have some sort of social media presence, whatever that is for. And maybe just going over what would be smart or what they should avoid doing on social media, especially public social media that isn't private, in terms of the career or field that you're in. Might be something that you just talk about with your students. And this might apply especially if they are first year or second year students who still have a whole 4 years at university, or longer if they decide to keep going. So just again, something to think about. I think also Michael put a comment in the chat, which is, I'm curious if you might have any advice on how to handle the balance of what platforms to use or how many. A common concern that I've heard from students is that their professors and TAs are all using different platforms and with different expectations. So I'm wondering how to strike that balance and creatively engage with social media without overwhelming students with additional responsibilities and expectations. So that's a good question. I think maybe stick to just one type of social media. Now, for your class, deciding which one to choose can be difficult because they're very different. I think if there was one professor asked their students to share their opinions on a topic that was the topic of the class for that day in the character limit for Twitter. So if that's something along the lines that fits your class goals, if like writing, language, anything with language, maybe Twitter's the way to go. I know a TA friend of mine who he uses Snapchat actually to ask students to send videos of themselves doing the exercises of that lesson. He's an exercise science education major. So they're short, they're only like 10 seconds long, I think, videos generally. So if that is along the lines of your field, then maybe that's the way to go. I don't know, Kelly, if you have something else to add.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And the trick is that, in thinking of using social media in the classroom, it's still pretty new. And so, the university doesn't have like any sort of yes, this, no, that. So I think if I were to make a recommendation, the first would be to like kind of maybe limit it to like one of the big social media things, unless there's like a specific one that really applies to your course. So like Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, those sorts of things. And depending on the sort of rapport you have with your class and like comfort level, I think you could definitely feel comfortable like even asking them preference, like they could,
Yes.
you could ask like, hey, I'm considering changing some things up. How would you guys feel about using, and then maybe you could have a poll or just kind of throw up like one or two that you specifically were looking at and seeing, if people were like excited or interested, then you'd be like, yeah, this could be worth it. But if like, again, you mentioned wanting to set up like a Facebook group and you're kind of met with crickets, then that might not be worth like, your time, and your students, may express some of the stresses that you wrote about in your comment. So yeah, I think starting small is always kind of like a good way to go, because you can always kind of change course if things are looking tough. You can be like, actually, from going forward, we're going to switch back to Blackboard. If you feel like people are struggling, or if they're really enjoying it, then you can kind of go from there. All this stuff is like pretty new, so I think feeling comfortable, telling your students that you're kind of experimenting to see like what works best. I'm a big fan of transparency with my students, where it's like, I'm a student like you, I'm also like teaching, so I'm kind of like in that in-between space. So I know what it's like to get the emails from SU. And I also, hopefully have some level of ability like as a teacher to kind of help bridge and like share information. So I think just being upfront about being like, I want to try something, I want to see if this is better for you guys, can do a lot to kind of share, to show your students that you're interested in, you care about like, if they enjoy it, if it's going to stress them out, those sorts of things. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those would be my thoughts on top of Hannah's great points.
One other thing, kind of going off of that too, is don't forget to consider yourself when you are deciding this. You don't have to offer the social media, but you also don't have to offer social media options that you have no idea how to use. Maybe you do want to try it out with the rest of the class, and like Kelly said, experiment with, does it work? But don't use Instagram if you've never had Instagram before. That's very daunting, and you'll have to figure out how to do it while looking at whatever type of assessment or assignment you asked the students to do. So definitely just consider your own, like what you're comfortable with, what's accessible for you, and then as well as, of course, what's accessible for your students and appropriate. So
Yeah. And I think if you're not sure, but you kind of want to get your students thinking about, that kind of curation idea, to kind of circle back to Hannah's point earlier. I think you can also definitely point out that, the kind of job hub that SU is using now for student employment is through Handshake, which is kind of a similar system as LinkedIn, where, you set up your like professional resume profile and stuff, but it's also in a way like a social media in a professional way. So it's definitely involved. SU in that way has kind of dipped their toes into it. So it's here to stay, and kind of seeing like what works for you, what works for your students is always good.
I just want to ask, I see that Glenn's here. Hi, Glenn. Do you have anything that you want to add or anything you'd like to say? Sure. I think
It's not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask and see if you had anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, for some reason I was having a weirdly hard time unmuting myself. I rarely have that problem, but you just had it right there. I had to join a little bit late. I'm wondering, did Sean give a plug for the next TA program event at the top of the show? He just set one up. Yeah,
he did,
good.
but if
Okay.
you'd like to kind of end,
Yeah.
I'll just wrap things up for you guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we needn't be overly sophisticated about that. How about if everybody would simply, either in the chat or with the little hand or like this, let's just acknowledge Kelly and Hannah for the great job that they did today, and hopefully giving you guys some tips and some confidence that you can try out some of these technologies and these tools and figure out how to turn them to the benefit of your class instead of potentially, on the other side of that equation. So thanks so much, guys. And I guess with that, I will end our meeting here. Thanks so much. Hannah and Kelly, I imagine you guys might be available to communicate, to follow up by email if anybody's got any other questions or try something out and they want to bounce an idea off you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to post my email in the chat really quick.
Same. I put it in there as well.
And I'll go into the presentation and update it with our email as well. So it'll be in the link that I shared initially. It's also in the chat. So yeah, any questions, happy to help you brainstorm and kind of learn with you. So
great. Okay, thanks guys. And I hope I'll see many of you at the next TA program thing coming up next week.
yeah, great. Thank you guys so much.
Bye.